That's right. It's more reading, but still has all the pits. Is the
Yep, all the
yeah.
dirt, all the bug
Yes.
bites, and
Right.
a dust allergy from the
Yes.
archive.
The New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, featuring your hosts, Gabe Reinick and Ken Holyoke. Featuring Gabe Reinick and Ken Holyoke. The New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast.
Welcome back to the Brunswick Archaeology Podcast. I'm Gabe Reinick in southern New England, and I'm joined, as I am just about every fortnight, by Ken Holyoke, who appears to be in a home studio somewhere in Lethbridge, Alberta. How are you, Ken?
I am in Studio 598. I'm doing well. I've got a bit of a summer cold. So for the listener, if I sound a little nasal, I apologize.
I thought you had just put that on in order to try to better match the dulcet tones of Gary Copeland, who we just interviewed.
Yeah, who we just interviewed, but will be our next episode, not
Yes,
this one.
That's right, and that's because this episode is going to be with Jonathan Fowler.
That's correct. Yeah,
Yes.
we're
Also has a great voice. It's just a different octave.
exactly. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So for those of you in a preview for the next fortnight, adjust your subwoofers.
Yes, exactly. And so Ken, you're getting ready for class, I imagine. That starts soon.
Yeah. So we start back the week after Labor Day. So we got a little bit extra time.
Oh, good. Okay.
So we go later into December this year. We're into the second week of December for classes, but yeah, I'm prepping, and I've got a new prep this fall. So that's kind of been what the bulk of my attention has been over the last few weeks.
What's the new prep?
Global heritage. So
it sounds nice in a narrow topic.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, there's but yeah, it's going to be looking at sort of heritage from a global perspective, looking at UNESCO and World Heritage and various different heritage and conflict zones, all this other stuff, but also contextualizing it in the way that Canada manages and works within the heritage framework. So there's a couple folks.
Wait, does Canada manage and work within the heritage?
Well, so this will be one of the things we talk about is the lack of federal legislation in Canada and how heritage planning, I guess, generally occurs in Canada. And a lot of what we talked about when it comes to CRM is really what the bread and butter of heritage planning is here.
Okay, and by the time this drops, it may still be the ad drop period. So if you're at Lethbridge and you want to help Ken's enrollments,
there you go.
Rush to sign up for.
Make me look good.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Ken, but speaking of things that look good, we here at the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast are still called the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, and that's despite our interests, including really global heritage.
That's true. We have a global audience, and in fact, I discovered a few weeks ago an alumnus of our archaeology program at University of Lethbridge stopped by. She's currently doing her master's at University of Tübingen. I can't remember how it's pronounced, but it's in Netherlands. And I wanted to shout out our global audience. Apparently, we've got some fans in the Low Countries.
Oh, that's great. That's always good to hear. What do they use as a VPN? Did they let you in on that? Or?
No. So I one of the things I should look at actually is to see whether or not how many hits we're getting from Netherlands. That's yeah.
That's always good to hear. But Ken, we might even get more listeners from the Netherlands if we had a name for this podcast that wasn't so geographically constricted, don't you think?
That's true. That it could open us up to a wider audience.
And this is going to be a bit of foreshadowing, but Emmanuel, our producer, has suggested that that if he can get the team on board with slightly better use of our recording equipment, we could actually be experiencing growth.
That's true. Yep.
Yeah.
One of our low points is that we keep promising Emmanuel that we're going to buy more new equipment and better microphones and that kind of thing. But we're not using our current equipment properly sometimes.
No.
And we've stepped up to bat and gone for the count and struck out on the last pitch several times. Yeah.
Yes. But Ken, if the listener wanted to rename this podcast, we wouldn't just steal their intellectual property, would we?
No, we would offer them a generous remuneration for that IP.
I think it's important. And if they wanted to send something, new name for this podcast in, for which they could be remunerated, as you put it, where would they send that?
They would send that to newbrunswickarchaeology@gmail.com. That's New Brunswick Archaeology, all one word. Archaeology spelled ARCHAEOLOGY, newbrunswickarchaeology@gmail.com. They could also find us on Instagram at new_Brunswick_archaeology, and archaeology spelled the same way.
That's right. And so, Ken, it's no secret that the show we currently know as the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast is not only informative, it's also sonically nuanced. And of course, that's because you and I do regular voice exercises broadcast out of carefully baffled and well-equipped sound studios, and our producer Emmanuel Ackel is really the Quincy Jones of educational podcast programs. And so, Ken,
true. All true.
There's really no disputing that, I think. And so, Ken, whether you're listening through headphones, out of powered computer speakers, or, as we recommend, and indeed the setting for which we optimize the show, stream through the Total DAC D1 Unity digital to analog converter into 11 CS600X integrated amplifier, driving DeVore Fidelity Super 9s, all strung together with AudioQuest Braveheart full-range cable, you can be assured of a quality audio experience.
What would that package take the cost the listener to get that set up?
Ken, many of the items here, we know the listener's worth it and the listener's nuance, but most of those things when I looked them up had one of those call for price settings. I think the cable alone would be rather extensive, but it is what you're supposed to listen to this show on.
Exactly.
But we make certain concessions. But Ken, did you know that some of our listeners aren't getting as much out of the listening experience as they could? And let me tell you why. Many people make the mistake of thinking that the sound experience begins at the source when you drop a needle on a brand new 33 1/3 record of the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast. But you know what that variable leaves out, Ken? Power. And power, of course, introduces all sorts of completely unacceptable noises into the listening experience. And who knows where it can come from? It might be from the transfer switch to your generator, the DC-AC converter from a solar system, the hum of the power line, even radio frequency interference or unstable voltage, and it's possible you're not getting the audio experience that you, and indeed this podcast and Emmanuel's hard work, deserves.
Do we have a new sponsor? Is this like for tinfoil hats?
Oh, it's even better, Ken. And now, Ken, many of our listeners have probably thought they've addressed all of these problems simply by installing an AC line conditioner in their living room. But of course, that neglects the various connections among dissimilar metals, contact points, and aluminum wires that start outside of your home. And so, Ken, the lucky listener who renames this podcast is going to get the gift of clean power. And I don't mean clean in the sense of how the power is generated. I mean clean in terms of how it sounds. And that's right, Ken. Our certified technicians are standing by, and they'll go to your home, listener, to install an entirely separate power source for your listening room. And obviously, Ken, everyone's audio problems are different, but a typical treatment begins with a new mast running up the side of the house where you'll tap into NB power with brand new copper wire. None of that sketchy aluminum here. From there, we're going into a brand new meter box and then into a new sub-panel that's crucially totally separate from the power that's going to deal with the non-audio parts of your home. And just a quick word about these panel boards, Ken. These are going to be done with solid copper mechanical lugs and neutral terminal bars. And of course, it goes without saying that we'll be listening to this new power on an entirely separate ground than the rest of the power that goes into your house. And so, Ken, That's an
incredible package.
Oh, it's an incredible package. And Ken, it's crucial, absolutely crucial, that this power cleaning system begin outside of the home. And that's why the lucky listener who renames this podcast this fortnight is going to get the full treatment. And so, Ken, where would the lucky listener send in the new name for this podcast?
Well, they would be sending that to newbrunswickarchaeology@gmail.com. That's New Brunswick Archaeology, all one word, archaeology spelled ARCHAEOLOGY. And you can find us on social media at @new_Brunswick_archaeology on Instagram.
That's right. And Ken, turning to that mailbag, what is in it?
Let's see what we have. We had such a full mailbag last time that let's see here. We've got Anuj. We apparently are in the top 35 New Brunswick podcasts. From according to the founder of FeedSpot.
No kidding. So that would be we're behind Backyard History, 6 podcasts about gravel biking, and the rest are about micro brewing. Is that right? Maybe some hockey ones.
I'm not sure, but Anuj wanted to personally congratulate us, and we're also in the top 3 Canada archaeology podcasts list. Well, there you go. So I wonder if I'm going to click one of these and see if I get malware.
Yeah. Ken, it might even be that when we restart the power outside of your house, we may also just want to install the internet, depending on what you're about to click on.
Yeah. According to the list, the top archaeology podcast in Canada is Peopling the Past with Dr. Chelsea Gardner and Dr. Carolyn Laferriere and Dr. Melissa Funke.
Okay.
Or Funk.
What's the second one?
Us.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
What's third? Who's chomping at our heels?
Dig This by Amanda Marshall and Jenny Bodica.
I mean, I think it's worth noting that our podcast, even at its current, even with its current name, is holding its own.
I think so. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. So
yeah, totally.
And then Wells want to explore hidden narratives with Wells Jones.
Okay. Well's done.
So I'm not sure if this is real or not. So this
East
might
of
be
the Rockies, you're on the air.
I hope this. Hey, Gabe and Ken, I hope this finds you both well. I thoroughly enjoyed your recent episode marking the season finale of the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast. The seamless blend of field updates and your fresh studio intro was engaging and brought a refreshing perspective.
Sounds real to me so far, Ken.
Yeah. Inspired by your explorations, I wanted to share my journey that parallels your commitment to storytelling and history. I've co-authored A Line in the Sand, an Amazon bestseller on Middle East history, which sprang from my 1,100-mile desert trek across Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Syria. I believe our tale of exploration and culture insights would resonate well with your audience. With a social reach of 25,000 adventurers and tech enthusiasts, my story could offer an intriguing discussion for your listeners. Would you be open to having me on as a guest? Oh, that's the first time we've had somebody write to ask to come on the show.
That is. Is the answer yes, but it will cost them?
What I don't know is if this is a real human being or this is like advanced AI stuff.
Was it a trek across southeast New Brunswick?
Yeah. So anyway,
okay, we'll take this under advisement.
Thanks for reaching out, Wells. And that's all we've got for today. Although we have, I want to shout out some new YouTube subscribers. We've got Kimber Sneeze, Jose Carlos, Sullivan Getchell, and Samantha Spring are now all YouTube listeners. So that's
thanks so much for following. That's great.
Yeah. So, but that's it for the mailbag.
Fantastic. And Ken, if someone wanted to write into this podcast, where would they send those emails?
They'd be sending that to newbrunswickarchaeology@gmail.com. New Brunswick Archaeology, all one word, archaeology spelled ARCHAEOLOGY. And shout us out on Instagram @new_Brunswick_archaeology. Archaeology spelled the same way.
That's right, listener. And so, Ken, we've got a pretty exciting episode for the listener coming out.
Yeah. So we're talking with Jonathan Fowler about the Grand Pré National Historic Site and UNESCO World Heritage Site, and about Acadian deportation and all sorts of other stuff.
The war was over, but their spirits weren't, in fact, broken.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's what we learned.
If we could legally play it, it would be really great. Instead of a whoosh, just a little bit of
thing.
Just the little clip of the accordion music from Acadian Driftwood.
Yeah, the listener can't see this, but Ken actually always podcasts sort of in that kind of hunched over shape that Levon Helm had. to kind of like somehow get his face out like over the drum kit to go into the microphone, and is wearing gloves and holding his pen like a drumstick.
Exactly.
Yes.
I'm ready to go.
Yes, exactly. And it's Ken. I mean, I suppose we should hand this over to us and to our interview with Jonathan.
Yeah, so our first Great Sites episode of season 4, and enjoy the interview, listener, and we've got some hit pieces after, so stay tuned.
Yeah, we're going to step into the hit piece TARDIS, and we'll catch you at the end of Jonathan's interview.
That's right. Today we are joined by Dr. Jonathan Fowler, who is a 2-time Commonwealth Scholar and a professor of archaeology at St. Mary's University in Halifax. He is also the owner and principal of Northeast Archaeological Research. He holds a DPhil in archaeology from the University of Oxford and an MA in landscape archaeology from the University of Sheffield. He's also an alumnus at St. Mary's University and got his undergrad degree there. His research interests are wide-ranging and include landscape archaeology, historical archaeology, imperialism, and archaeological geophysics, including research in the UK, Greece, Hungary, Cuba, and Antigua and Barbuda. Jonathan has also authored more than 150 research reports, scholarly articles, and book chapters, and his work employs both traditional and high-tech archaeological methods to improve our understandings of past places and events. He's joining us today to talk about his historical archaeological work on a long-term research project he's been conducting at the Grand Pre National Historic Site and UNESCO World Heritage Site, and also, we wanted to promote that he has his latest book, Diaries of the Acadian Deportations, Volume 2, John Winslow at Grand Pre, co-written with Earl Lockerbie, is coming out this fall by Gaspereau Press. So thank you, Jonathan, for joining us today.
Thanks for joining us, Jonathan. Yeah. Congratulations on the new book.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for the invitation. The book was a bit of a sweat, I have to say. So I'm glad it's coming out at long last.
Maybe actually just before we start here, there's what was Volume 1 about in that series?
Yeah, so I'll step back. The concept for the series is to bring to publication a collection of primary sources that give eyewitness testimony to the deportation of the Acadians. And the first one was one of those. It was a very little known and very small account, a diary, a daybook of a soldier named Jeremiah Bancroft. The document had been known to a small number of historians for a number of years, but really had very little broader public currency. So we published that one first. In fact, it's over that I met Earl, my friend and collaborator, and then we just carried on. But the Winslow book is far more complex. It's kind of like... in nautical terms, it'd be like comparing a canoe to a battleship. So the Winslow book is much larger, more complicated, more involved, and it took a lot longer.
Very cool. Well, fortunately, Gaspereau Press books are kind of built like battleships, in my experience, with the hand-sewn binding and the extremely thick paper.
What's Trevor's line? They've got a great hand feel.
Yes, I think that's Trevor's. Yeah.
No, it's true, and in fact, I'll say this, certainly not to blow my horn, but to give accolades to Andrew Steeves at Gaspereau, because he's really the designer who we've collaborated with. Andrew is an artist, proper artist, and the Bancroft book won a National Design Award. We were so pleased with it. We took a long time to come up with a design that we thought worked, that allowed the reader to go back and forth between the primary source. And Andrew, in designing the Bancroft book, the first book, did such a great job, and it allows the reader to go back and forth kind of seamlessly between the primary source text itself of Bancroft's diary and our gloss and discussions and elaborations and little asides. And we've taken the same approach with the Winslow book. So it allows readers to engage with the historical material, but at the same time read a book on almost a parallel track as these two historians are ruminating on the content.
The listener will hear that you're drawing on these archival documents and sort of diaries and things like that. And so you're a historical archaeologist. And so can you tell the listener a bit about historical archaeology, so the time periods that you're studying and how your work might differ from the kinds of research and sources that someone specializing, for example, in pre-contact archaeology might draw from?
Well, sure. Archaeology is such a fascinating discipline. It really is a discipline that works in many different domains. And for the historical archaeologist, we are doing all the traditional field archaeological things. We're prospecting for sites. We're conducting surveys. We're doing all sorts of field analyses. We may chat a little bit later about remote sensing and terrestrial geophysics and the like. But we dig holes, whether they're test pits or formal excavation units, and all of that concern for context and stratigraphy and for the material record and all of its complexity. So that is present. But additionally, in historical archaeology, we have the benefit of the text. Not everywhere and not at all times. And texts can be very problematic, certainly at times, but we have some kind of written record to rely on, and then compare and contrast and collate. And that text, I would say, goes beyond just the written word. It could include other things, including cartography. I just love old maps, find them fascinating and beautiful, and again, problematic at times. So artwork, text, photography, you name it. But all of these other things that we tend to find in archives and art galleries, we get to bring into the debate and the discussion. And it makes for, I find, a really rich intellectual pursuit. So that's my small pitch for historical archaeology.
That's right. It's more reading, but still has all the pits. Is the
Yep, all the dirt, all the bug
Yes.
bites, and
Right.
a dust allergy from the archive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And so today we're going to travel to pre-Nova Scotia, really, the 17th, 18th century era of what was then Acadia at a place called Grand Pre on the Minas Basin, where you've been doing some work. And could you tell us a bit about the era of occupation you're interested in there, and what's going on in Acadia and the Maritimes at that time?
So I'm really interested in, as you say, the 17th, 18th century period. It's a fascinating period, and it's a period that I would say we both know and don't know. Yeah, this is a period that historians have written about for centuries. There's many generations of historians, many different trends in the historiography, a fair bit of public awareness, not always of all of the detail, or even all of the accurate facts of the period, but there's a kind of common knowledge of the period. I find it interesting because it's a period in which different groups of people come together. Colonial encounters we rightly focus on the destructive aspects of colonial encounter, but they're also creative in certain ways. So it's a time of accelerating social change, when different European peoples come together to these shores. Folks like the British, the French, we know them as modern blocks, but really there's diverse subgroups within those, as well as indigenous people, predominantly the Mi'kmaq in this part of the world. And of course the French, who do something very interesting. They establish a settler population beginning really in the 1630s, although there are some precursors to that. And at some point in the following decades, an ethnic group is born, a national identity is born, and they become the Acadians. So all of this is happening. By the middle of the 18th century, there's a world war. We know it as the 7 Years' War, generally the European expression of it at any rate. And it results in the deportation of the French and Catholic population, the Acadians, and sort of a very destructive war in this part of the world. The cultural experiment that had been initiated by the French with the Acadians was at least severely stalled. A world was destroyed. And of course, that world involves now an archaeological footprint that we can examine and consider in relation to the historical record, and also consider in relation to the broader history of ethnic violence, and see what conclusions we can draw from that. So these themes draw my attention as well.
I'm going to interrupt you because I can see Ken reaching for a question, but while we're still on that subject, Jonathan, what are some of the key historical records from this period? Like if you were to name, a couple of handful of references of material that you've researched that has been particularly helpful in your work. I just want the listener to get a sense of, like, is it probate records? Is it maps, as you mentioned?
Yeah, it really depends, I would say, on the questions that you bring to the period. If your questions are those of the, say, historical geographer or the environmental historian, then the cartographic record is really powerful. What's interesting about this period is, and the records it produced, is that it was a very international kind of experience. So the historical records it generated can be found not only here in Nova Scotia, for example, just down the road from where I am right now, the Nova Scotia Archives, but it can be found in the church archives in Quebec, the seminary, for example, the diocese. It can be found in the British National Archives, the British Library. There are maps in the Royal Collection, in Buckingham Palace and their various warehouses. Scotland, the Scottish Archives, on it goes, the French National Archives, the Library of Congress. I mean, I could continue.
All the good destinations for good reasons to go do some archaeology work is to just get over to France
very much
and spend some days in the archives.
Yeah, very much so. And I think of that a lot, particularly in relation to those generations of historians that came earlier who I mentioned. They really did have to travel, either that or try to get somebody to sneak in with a camera with an exploding flash bulb or something. But of course, nowadays, so much of this stuff is digital, and it's becoming more and more available digitally. Sadly, in some ways, we're losing our need to travel. But but there's also such a richness of material that means that, and I'm just scratching the surface of the cartographic. We could get into the texts, but it's the same dynamic applies. This is a very, very creative time for the making of history and historical inquiry, because we have far more material to work with than our predecessors had, and it's really due to digitization. It's at our fingertips.
Yeah. So when you talked about how much you like maps, one of the first thing I thought about is this sort of the sort of mass digitization of these historical maps, and increasingly some of them are getting georeferenced in interesting ways, and stretching and kind of trying to see how people are visualizing space and stuff like that. And so I guess when you're thinking about cartographic depictions of this area at this time, what are the kinds of things that are appearing on these sorts of maps? Like what's the landscape of Grand Pré look like to the people who are drawing it, I guess, at that time?
Yeah, sadly, it doesn't look like much. We do get maps that tend to be small-scale maps. We know what this means. It means everything on them looks really small. So you're like in Google Earth, but you're zoomed way out. And we get a lot of maps like that. And they're maps by armchair cartographers. Many of them never even visited the region. And you'll look, if you squint, and you'll see something like Grand Pré, a little dot, or maybe a little icon with a church or something like that. But it doesn't I mean, I'm speaking to archaeologists here, so you can understand my frustration. Yet it doesn't really help us reconstruct a sense of what that place looked like. How many people lived there? Where were the property lines drawn? How many different types of buildings, and what was their layout on the ground? Roads, cemeteries, mills, etc.
I mean, Jonathan, you could also be describing my sketch maps in my field notebook when I return to them 2 years later. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. But at least you've tried. I mean, the other thing that happens is you get these antiquarians who visit these sites in the 19th century when all the cellar holes were still there, and they've left some quite remarkable accounts as well. Very often they say things like, "Oh, yes, you can very clearly see the remains of this village. There's 10 cellars here," and not a map to be seen.
We didn't have a Squire and Davis at Grand Pré, eh?
This is the thing. So this makes it also a really appropriate subject for archaeology and historically informed archaeology, because despite the fame of this site, despite its impact in literature, Longfellow of Angoulême, the Acadian national reawakening, things we can discuss, it is one of the most well-known and iconic, truly, places in this great sweep of historiography. But we know very little about what it actually looked like. And we need to work awfully hard to figure that out.
Yeah. So let's turn to that for a minute then. And so the deportation obviously is a touchstone in Acadian and Maritimes history, and it's immortalized in various media, including the song by the band. And one of the things that maybe to start off with is just what was the derangement and how does it link to Grand Pré?
Right. So it's in a nutshell, in the middle of the 18th century, the local British government. I should even back up. Even this is difficult, guys. Look, so I'll back up one further step. It's a French colony, nominally a French colony. Of course, in the early days, the major population is indigenous, Gradually, the French settler population overtakes the indigenous population. But initially, Mi'kma'ki, okay, Acadie, the French called it. It gets its name from a legal charter that's written in the very early years of the 17th century. The French settler population comes. The French officials, metropolitan officials, tend to call them Acadiens because they are distinguished from the Canadiens, the French settlers of the St. Lawrence River Valley, Canada. So gradually, this part of the world, which was really a frontier zone between the French colonial empire, overseas empire, and the British overseas empire, New England, became kind of a contested zone. And in the early 1700s, the British conquered this place. And with it came this collection of Acadiens, these Acadian colonists who were essentially permitted to stay. And over the next few decades, a series of questions arose as to their status, whether they would be considered British subjects, whether they would be considered some kind of enemy alien. And how you answer that question really depended on your politics and your values. But by and large, the Acadians became subjects of the British Crown. They swore an oath of neutrality around about 1730, we might as well say. And in fact, generally they were called the neutral French in records of this period. So fast forward now to the middle of the 18th century. Britain nominally governs this province, which they call Nova Scotia, New Scotland. It has a population that is largely non-British. It's French, it's indigenous, largely Catholic from the British perspective, not a good thing. They're Protestant. They're coming off of multi-generational religious wars. And so the neutrality of the Acadians was suspect to certain of these British governors. In the summer of 1755, the governor and acting governor, in fact, and council here in Halifax took the very dread decision to deport the entire population. They, avoiding the weeds, let's just say they set a little bit of a trap for them, and they decided to make this policy happen by stratagem, as is the word that appears in John Winslow's Orderly book. And that's essentially what happens. The summer of 1755, the decision is taken by the British. They send their troops into the communities. They take men and boys hostage, capture them, and hold them as hostages against the good behavior of the women and children and the elderly in the communities until the ships arrive. And it's quite an interesting and grim history. So that's basically the series of events, as I say, in a nutshell. What that leads to is an enormous diaspora. So the Acadians are spread all over the world, initially into the New England colonies, but ultimately they travel far and wide. Some of them end up relocating into what's now the southern U.S., Louisiana. They become the Cajuns. Many others end up in Quebec, others in Europe and other places around the world. It's an amazing story. But at Grand Pre, it's the story of this community that gets attacked by a small detachment of New England soldiers under the command of this fellow from just south of Boston named John Winslow. And he arrives there toward the end of August of 1755 with just over 300 men. And he summons the village elders to a meeting and eventually issues a proclamation ordering all the men and boys to come to the church to hear a proclamation. And when they arrive, of course, they're arrested, and this stratagem plays out.
Yeah. So that's Grand Pre. Basically, is not just it was a small village, but it's a huge landscape. It's both a National Historic Site and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And so, like from a practical standpoint, what does that mean for the archaeology work that goes on there, and sort of what does the archaeology look like when you're on the ground? Like the kinds of you've mentioned there's some cellars that are you don't see the depressions anymore, but what are you what's the scale and the scope and size of this landscape and this village that you're investigating?
It is multi-scalar for sure. And the thing about archaeology is one of the things that makes archaeology both, I think, really fascinating and compelling, but also sometimes extremely challenging to the point of being maddening, is that your subject matter goes from the tiniest speck of a piece of glaze that's flaked off a piece of tin glazed earthenware in a trench fill. It goes from that to, say, John Winslow's military camp, to, say, an ecclesiastical landscape. It's a church, it's a priest's house, it's a cemetery, to a village, to now a field system that involves us in dykeland agriculture. Something we've not really discussed so far in this conversation is that the Acadians performed a strange kind of subsistence agricultural practice by diking and damming and draining tidal wetlands and resulting in very, very fertile farms. But that takes us into a whole other realm of wet site archaeology and landscape scale archaeology, which is accessible now not so easily through test pits. It gets us into remote sensing and LiDAR and things like that. So it's multi-scalar. It is properly landscape archaeology. And the fascinating thing about it is that so little is known of that broad picture. If we were to try to examine this landscape and this story strictly with traditional archaeological methods, I think we'd burn through 100 lifetimes before we got there. We really do need to use landscape scale methods.
And so you talked about this, the dykeland farming, and at the risk of causing some PTSD for our listeners who participated in the Petacodiac project, can you tell us a little bit about a little bit more detail about dykeland farming and abattoirs? The first,
and that's 8 of our 12 listeners you're referring to there. So,
yeah, exactly.
So we should maybe do a longer trigger warning.
Yeah. Sorry, Jesse, and Trevor and Lisa and Darcy. The first project I worked on actually was for a lagoon replacement in outside of Moncton, and we found a very early abattoir sluice. And so I've been totally fascinated by the technology since then. So you can tell the listener a little bit about what was going on, how they were using the Grand Pré landscape, and what sort of infrastructure you might have found there.
When the early French arrived here, they were looking at a landscape that was dominated by forests. Unlike New England, where when the Europeans arrived, they were met by indigenous people who were practicing a form of agriculture and had cleared large areas and were living sedentary lives. Here, the approach was more of a hunter-gatherer fisher economy, and the forests had, they weren't perhaps everywhere, but they were most places. So the French took a look around, and as they did in the St. Lawrence Valley, they discovered, indeed as they did in New England, people discovered the salt marshes or the tidal marshes, the tidal wetlands that we generally don't think very much about today, but they are among the richest ecosystems in this part of the world. They form particularly around the upper reaches of the Bay of Fundy system, so into, say, Cumberland Basin, the Minas Basin, where Grand Pré is located, Annapolis Basin, where the Annapolis River is, where, in fact, the first Acadians began doing this work, diking and draining the marshes. And initially, the marshes were used, as they were in the St. Lawrence Valley and as they were in New England, they were used for grass. You can just do nothing to the marshes, just cut the grass and feed your cattle, and your cattle will thank you. Cattle, of course, are perfectly happy in the woodlands, but come wintertime, you need to feed them. And just the natural grasses growing on the salt water-tolerant grasses growing on these marshes are perfect for fodder. And so that's how this resource was used initially, but the Acadians took it one step farther, which was by building permanent dams to dam off sections of these tidal marshes and then a series of ingenious little devices for draining off the water once the tide has subsided, so the fresh water can drain out. This sluice is the aboiteau structure you're referring to. And piecemeal, many tens of thousands of acres were gradually terraformed into some of the richest farmland in this part of North America. It's a fascinating subject. It's a really ingenious technology. It's a very ancient technology. It goes back to the Iron Age, at least in Europe. But it worked its way into France, and it was brought across the Atlantic by the French in the 17th century. And one of the really interesting things about it, I find, is that here again, there's real opportunity for discovery, because we know in general about the technology, we know in general about Acadian dikeland farming. What we don't know is necessarily the history in detail of any particular marsh, when it was diked and drained, by whom. But now with archaeology, married, I should add, to dendrochronology, so tree ring dating, we have the capacity to recover elements of this diking program and date them and write a history that never was recorded before, because it was all vernacular technology. It would be you and your uncle and your cousin and building this stuff. There was never a government permit. There was never a license.
They weren't issuing Wawa permits back in there wasn't
no such thing. No such thing. And so we have the ability through archaeology to create really a historical record of something that was never documented in the traditional sense.
Very cool.
So, Jonathan, my understanding is that as a Sheffield grad, written in the bottom of your diploma is in Latin, an obligation that you have to talk about landscape archaeology on every interview. So I'm glad we give you that opportunity. But
it may happen again.
Yeah. But if we could narrow in a little bit too on place. So Grand Prairie is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the listener could go to the website and find out why UNESCO says so. But why do you think it's a UNESCO World Heritage? Like, what do you think the value is that it has that makes it so important?
UNESCO is an organization that came into being after the Second World War, of course, and its mission is to build peace through understanding and education and scientific collaboration and such. And part of its program is the operation of the World Heritage Site program. These are sites that are said to have what is called outstanding universal value. In other words, these are sites that every human being should be able to connect with. And by connecting with these sites, we will learn something not just particular about these sites, but something about humanity itself. So that's sort of the broad picture. Under that rubric, this site was put forward by the Canadian government some years back. It worked its way through the system. I became involved with that around 2008 or 9 as part of a group that was commissioned by Parks Canada to formulate what was the outstanding universal value of the site. And essentially, the group came down to two major points, one of which deals really with a kind of localized phenomenon, which is the Acadian story, the story of the development of this unique culture and its successes and its resilience. And Grand Prairie itself is a place of memory because of the whole deportation narrative, the way it's been memorialized there. So that's one aspect of it. The other is broader and deals with the things that we were just discussing a moment ago. The landscape, I told you it would come back. So the landscape and the testing of human ingenuity against, in this case, the radical environmental challenge of the Fundy tides and the introduction of that diking system, which still continues to this day. So those are the two main reasons why the site has been awarded, as it was in 2012, by this UN status. Naturally, it could be applied to other places. Certainly, the dikeland aspect was right across the region, and the deportation, although it's not remembered and commemorated at all of these sites across the region, it certainly did unfold across the region. So, if anything, as much as my work has been centered, parts of it have been centered at Grand Pre, I like it when the work extends beyond that footprint and beyond that spotlight, because there are really important stories out there in the hinterland as well.
Yeah, I think that.
So do you think that Grand Pre is particularly important, or became sort of a stand-in for some of those other sites? Is it because of the Longfellow poem? Is it because of that sort of commemoration that even preceded the UNESCO designation? Is that why it stands in for the other ones?
You'll have to buckle up for a historical irony here, and this is something we go into at great length in the book. So,
Oh, excellent.
I mentioned John Winslow. So he was the fellow from Massachusetts that brought the deportation to Grand Pre in the fall, late summer and fall of 1755. He recorded his activities in an orderly book. It's sometimes called a journal or a diary. Properly speaking, it's an orderly book. It's a kind of military record that officers in the 18th century kept. So all the orders sent or received, supplies, finances, how many barrels of peas, you can imagine.
The rum
So
ration.
oh yeah, very, very important, the rum ration. So all of these little details are recorded in this book. And when he returned home to Massachusetts, he brought his book with him. And it stayed in the family until the very end of the 18th century, when it was deposited in the Massachusetts Historical Society in downtown Boston, where it still is, where I've seen it, and I invite you to go and see it. It's a remarkable document. And that book offers a day-by-day account of the deportation of the Acadians at Grand Pre. When the first histories were being written of 18th century Nova Scotia, the very early 19th century, especially by Halliburton consulted Winslow. And so when you read the earliest histories, particularly, starting with Halliburton, the 1755 and the deportation of the Acadians is about Grand Pre, because his primary source was John Winslow. And then, in the middle of the 19th century, when the poet Longfellow began preparing his work, he went to the library at Harvard, among other places, and he picked off the shelves his source materials, and what did he find but T.C. Halliburton? So he built his poem around Grand Pre, built his poem around John Winslow, the destroyer, who now gets remobilized in a poetic work that becomes world famous and inadvertently plants the seeds of an Acadian national reawakening at the end of the 19th century. So great irony there that John Winslow, in documenting his destruction of this community, would play a critical role in this boomerang effect, which would help to create the modern Acadian nation.
Yeah, and I think
you've written about this, I believe, right? And we'll put that in the show notes. There's an article you've done, Jonathan, about commemoration at Grand Pre.
Yeah, there's a couple little bits and pieces here and there along the way, and I just find it amazing because it just goes to show you the unintended consequences that hover around our actions.
Yeah, I think there's this idea in the popular conscious that like the 1755, and there's sort of this one event of people being marched out to a boat, but that's not the case, right? Like this was an event that took place over a couple of years and in a variety of different locations and played out over, these tragedies kind of were recurrent and over huge areas, basically.
Very true. If you've ever watched a movie based on a book and come out saying, well, it was good, but it was nowhere near as good as the book was, because the book had just so much more in it. They always have to shave it down. Well, Longfellow shaved it down. And so even at Grand Pre, Winslow arrives, I think, on August 19th, and he doesn't leave until, his troops don't leave until, I think, January. So there it's several months. It's just a few days in Longfellow. So the closer you look, the more you see.
So Winslow is the British captain, but the first book in the Acadian deportation series revolves around Jeremiah Bancroft. And so what was Bancroft's role at Grand Pre?
Yeah, Bancroft was an ensign, so he was a junior officer. Winslow was a New England. By the way, these guys were New Englanders. They were British in the broadest sense. This is pre-revolutionary times. And in fact, many of the officers and not a few of the men who served in this military operation went on to become significant players in the Revolutionary War period. Winslow himself died just before the Revolution. He almost certainly would have been a royalist. He had royal sympathies straight the way through, but he died and was gone before Lexington and Concord and all the rest of it. But many of his family members, including two of his sons, were purged and sent north. Well, anyway, it's a complicated history. But Bancroft was just an ensign. He was a junior officer who just happened to have an interest in documenting his experience. And so remarkably, what you get is a very detailed, orderly book on the part of the superior officer, Winslow, who's the commander of this detachment, and a tiny little document by this much more junior figure who totally forgotten by history, Bancroft. And it allows us, in the way that we like to do, whether you're a journalist or whether you're investigating a crime or whether you're a historian, you want to gather your evidence and then see how the different testimonies relate and interrelate. So bizarrely, we can do that at Grand Pre in 1755 because we have not only Winslow, but we have Bancroft. We would love to have more. Sadly, we don't.
And so, Jonathan, you've generously slipped us in here for an interview, and so we're going to discuss for a minute here, I guess, the equipment that you're delaying loading into your car, probably. So I hope this doesn't cut too much. But we've talked about the digging holes, we've talked about some of the literature that you use to do this work, but you're also an expert in geophysical techniques. And could you tell us a bit about what sort of geophysical tools you're using at Grand Pre and how these are contributing to the story that you're telling?
It's a bit of an involved area, geophysics and remote sensing. I'll summarize, and maybe down the road, if you guys are interested, I'd be happy to have further conversation. But let's start with a little story. I got involved in this work through, it's just serendipity, through a couple of friends. I don't know if you know Rob Ferguson, Parks Canada, former Parks Canada archaeologist. Rob's a good buddy, and for many years we co-taught the field school at Grand Pre National Historic Site. So he was the Parks Canada archaeologist, I was the university archaeologist, and we'd rent a couple vans, fill them with students, go down, dig, do the work. Brilliant experience, and Rob is a terrific guy. And anyway, just before we got into that, Rob was an early adopter of terrestrial geophysics here. A very enterprising guy. Very competent field archaeologist. And Rob met, I'm not even sure really how, a guy from industry, since become a good friend, Duncan McNeil, who was the owner and president of Geonics Limited, which is a Canadian manufacturer of geophysical equipment based in Mississauga, Ontario. So now we're going back to probably 1999, 2000, thereabouts. And I met Duncan through Rob. Rob had been using some of Duncan's equipment over in PEI at Greenwich, doing landscape scale prospection for pre-deportation Acadian sites over there. Back in those days, of course, the equipment involved placing the instrument on the ground, pressing the trigger to take a sample, and then picking it up, moving it the next meter, bending over, pressing the trigger, picking it up, and you end up...
That's not any better than digging.
No, it's some serious troglodyte activity, right? Like, it's very, very bad for your back. Now, since then, the equipment has moved on, and so you just walk over the ground with it. It just does automatic logging, and of course, we've gone through various iterations. Now we have Bluetooth and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, I met Duncan, and Duncan is a fascinating guy, very interesting guy. Comes from a scientific background, a little bit like my colleague Earl Lockerbie, who I've written this book with. Earl comes from nuclear science. He's a scientist who's retired and has a love of history and has been writing history books avocationally as a historian. Duncan, similarly, business guy, loves history, loves archaeology, and has been engaged with trying to apply his high-tech tools at archaeological sites. So we began collaborating at Grand Pre using what was called the EM38B, which is an electromagnetic induction instrument. This instrument was developed for the environmental sector and looking for scanning for contamination and looking at soil salinity and different things. But come to find out, it can also see archaeology. It does so by looking at effectively, it's sort of like a resistivity meter, but it does conductivity. It's the inverse of resistivity. Buried stones are not very conductive of an electrical current because they're denser or less moisture. So there you go. But it does something really quite special called magnetic susceptibility. So it can detect soil magnetism. And variations in soil magnetism can be natural, but they can also be caused by architectural investment, people building something, particularly with stone. And a lot of the stone that people have built with in the Annapolis Valley is very highly magnetic basalt. The glaciers scraped off North Mountain and deposited on the valley floor. It's very hard, it's very prismatic, great building material. You can hold a fridge magnet to it, it'll stick. Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Go get a magnet and a string. It's one of my parlor tricks for some of the students who join us for the first time. You hold a magnet on a string next to a piece of basalt, and it just snaps right to it. So the instrument sees this very
You sound like
clearly.
great soils to screen. No wonder you got into it.
Yeah. Well, I didn't even talk about the clay, but so it can see that without getting too much into the science of it. It can also see areas that have been burned. So we've used the instrument to detect pre-contact hearths, several hundred years old. You burn a building, John Winslow, 1755. Let me tell you, you can see that. So when you are looking for a village and you've got a series of open pastures, if you walk around with this instrument and linear transects back and forth and you end up mapping it, well, I can tell you that these house sites, burnt house sites especially, really stand out, and they allow you to target your excavations in the same way that maybe an X-ray or an MRI would allow a surgeon to target a surgery. And it's super powerful equipment. And we've since iterated beyond that and gone into radar and other techniques. But it's been a great test bed for these technologies in archaeology in Canada.
Very cool. And so just briefly before we go, you mentioned you can detect hearths with it. And so do we know much about the pre-Acadian history or the Mi'kmaq history at Grand Pre? And is some of the work that you're kind of picking up through resistivity and these surveys, is that kind of contributing to how you're finding this?
We do find evidence of Mi'kmaq ancestral activity. In fact, even at Grand Pre National Historic Site a few years ago, going back probably 2013 now, over top of a piece of the Acadian cemetery there is a ancestral Mi'kmaq site, which we discovered quite by accident because it wasn't very evident geophysically, but we were trenching just very shallow trenches to try to ground truth and determine the borders of the cemetery, so mapping the grave shafts. And as we were trenching across the plow zone, basically at the top, we hit some lithic scatters and some really interesting, materials that were much older than the Acadian presence. So in this and other ways, you can see evidence of the Mi'kmaq site, or the Mi'kmaq presence, I should say. You can also see it through the historical record. It's not as if these two populations didn't integrate. Some of the people in the cemetery are Mi'kmaq people. We know this from the parish registers. We know that there were Mi'kmaq people being baptized in the Catholic Church at Grand Pre and many other communities, and marriages celebrated there, burials. But the major Mi'kmaq population center appears to have been obviously somewhat mobile, but based in the neighboring Gaspereau River Valley. Quite interested in the fish of the same name. Yeah. So, but there are Mi'kmaq sites all around that landscape, and there's that magic word again.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Jonathan. And we're looking forward to the Winslow book, and we really appreciate you taking the time to come on and tell us about it and about Grand Pre.
I hope you like footnotes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Jonathan, and really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks a lot, guys. Much appreciated.
Well, Ken, I think it's time for hit pieces.
I think it is time for hit pieces.
And Ken, we've been noting it's actually late summer here appears to be kind of harvest season for Northeast archaeology papers.
It does, yeah. So I think this was the same thing last year. Is that everybody had a bunch of stuff come out over the course of the sort of late summer, early fall.
Yes, and, of course. This year we may also be picking up the ones that were actually supposed to be published in late winter, but because of the Cambridge data hacking.
Yeah. So the listener might not realize it, but apparently Cambridge University Press journals were subject to a fairly cybersecurity issue, basically, and all of their journals are at least 6 months behind. It seems like, basically. So, including like premier journals like Cambridge Archaeological Journal and American Antiquity and other ones like that. So, kind of has like a knock-on effect for a whole bunch of different things.
But speaking of knock-on effects, we've got some bad news.
Yeah. So knock-on effects, I think, is probably what's leading to this. And so the Wintergren Foundation for Anthropology is a really important organization based out of the United States that funds anthropological and archaeological research worldwide. I've been lucky enough to have a Wintergren Foundation grant during my PhD, and I actually hold one right now for some of the work I'm doing. Gren has for several years published an anthropology magazine called Sapiens. And
wonder why they call it that.
Exactly. So it launched in 2016, but unfortunately will be wrapping up publication at the end of 2025. And so they're no longer accepting new submissions to Sapiens, and they're kind of publishing what they had on the docket already. And part of this stems from Sapiens lost its publishing partner, so the University of Chicago Press, and having a publication partner obviously facilitates hosting the magazine, but also some of the funding that goes along with it. And while they approached a number of different presses, to quote from their email, the search for a new publishing partner has not proven successful. Many of the institutions we've approached are reeling from the unprecedented assault on their finances and stability that has been let loose in the U.S. over these past several months. And so a direct result of some of the funding cuts that we talked about with Chris Dorr a few weeks ago is it's having a real life effect. Anthropologists and archaeologists. So this is one less venue for us to share our work through. It was an open access news magazine style, shorter articles, and highlighted the researchers that were, funded by Wintergren, but also other researchers, and was one of these places where stuff that is not necessarily peer-reviewed literature, but is topical and important, and and disciplinary, a place to kind of get out that disciplinary information, is disappearing, and that's a real challenge, right? It means that it's hard to find different places to. As we've discovered, some things that don't fit in a traditional archaeological journal, but are still, we think, important information, important research, has one less place to go, basically.
Yes, and what Ken means, listener, by that too is if anyone here that we're talking to is on the editorial board, ideally a very prestigious newspaper, we'd probably settle for pretty minor at this point. We have an op-ed that is looking for a home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so maybe I'll reach out to the Lethbridge Herald next.
Yes.
So
in Lethbridge, do you reach out, or do you ride by on a horse in a hat, and how does this work?
Probably get more feedback if I rode by on the horse. So anyway, they're not able to sustain Sapiens without a partner, and what they didn't want to do was continue funding a news magazine and draining funds for important scholarship that they're supporting, in particular because Wintergren is one of these foundations that will be critical to funding researchers in the United States in particular that are now in some cases cut off from the National Science Foundation funding, and universities that have taken a real hit to their funding packages.
And then next up, Ken, we've got better news. We've got a hit piece from Port Jolly Harbor.
Yeah. So this is location is near and dear to both of our hearts. Gabe's master's research and some PhD research, and my one of the best experiences I ever had was in Port Jolly Harbor in archaeology and working with Gabe and Matt Betts. And so the research group out of University of Alberta, led by Marissa Dussault, Matt Betts from the Canadian Museum of History, and then Kristen Paduska and Megan Birchall from Memorial University of Newfoundland. The paper is called Preliminary Investigation of the Local Marine Reservoir Effect in Port Jolly Harbor, Nova Scotia, using archaeological Maya arenaria shells. It's published in the journal Paleogeography, Paleoclimatology, and Paleoecology, volume 658. And this one actually looks like it's backdated to January. So I don't know if this is one that we maybe missed and just got posted recently. But the Coles notes of this, fairly technical paper, but basically the delta R value is essentially when you are trying to date archaeological material in a coastal setting. The water throws off the dates, and so
we say the water that the thing consumed before it died.
Exactly. Yeah. So the salt water or the water from the ocean basically can cause some errors in the dates. I think it can make things older. Is that right? I don't.
Yeah. So the sources of carbon are different, basically, and so you get this reservoir of carbon.
Yeah, and so what they were doing with this particular study was looking at whether or not shells from archaeological contexts could be used for the calibrations of C14. And so basically, the outcome of this is that there's some really interesting local data coming out of Port Jolly Harbor. That's important because when you're doing these marine reservoir effect calibrations, sometimes it's at a regional level, and so you don't. And the water is going to be the carbon storage in different areas is going to be different for different regions. So the more local data you have, the better. And dating shells is actually very tricky. And one of the things that they recommend is that maybe looking at the chondrophores, and so the hinge point of a shell is a place where you might be able to get these corrections and might be able to date the shellfish itself in archaeological contexts.
Mm-hmm. But we should say for this paper, this is really it's like when you see the advertisement for a car, and they say, well, this was performed on a closed track. These are a lot of shellfish experts going out of their way to do this, and don't start dating shell. Unless you've got this team ready to do this. Friends don't let friends date shell.
Yeah. This is fairly complicated. The paper itself is quite a bit more technical than my wherewithal is. So mm-hmm. I will stick to wood charcoal and God willing the terrestrial mammal bone if it shows up.
Exactly. We'll go right back to dating burned roots, just like the good Lord intended.
Yeah, I'll find out here in the near future whether or not we dated a bunch of burnt roots just recently.
That's right. So. And Ken, our final hit piece is a new paper by friend of the program, Donald Hawley, who we somehow have not actually had on for an interview.
Yeah, I know. I
which is strange,
that, actually. Yeah.
And we should do that. And T. Max Friesen, at the university. Don is at Eastern Illinois University. Max Friesen is at U of T. And there are articles called The Archaeology of Forgetting, the Dorset and Arctic Antiquity, and that's in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal coming up. I believe it's actually technically in press right now, so we don't have more citation information. But it's an interesting paper, and it deals with what is going on when we see technologies kind of disappear in the archaeological record. So when people sort of stop doing things that it seems like there is good reason to still be doing. What's going on with that? And they use this example of the Dorset and technological change in the Arctic.
Yeah, and that's in some cases this forgetting for good reasons, and sometimes it's forgetting for no reason other than it got too far away in the past, that something was abandoned and it actually was forgotten. In some cases, it's a conscious forgetting to kind of reset things.
Mm-hmm. And Ken, actually, another thing we should just plug, if you're a student out there and you're taking North American archaeology, Don and Max here have a actually really good sort of like 2-paragraph summary of Arctic prehistory.
Oh yeah. And so if you're ever confused about Arctic culture history and chronology, which in fairness, it's okay if you are, because I get confused by it all the time. Yeah, there's one page in the article, and I should have bookmarked it here, but there's one page of it that is essentially this kind of perfect summary of Arctic archaeology, and what was there was something else that we had noted was particularly like one there was like a phrase in there, and it's for the life of me I'm not going to be able to find
I'm not sure.
it here.
I mean, Don writes very well about hunter-gatherers, so in general,
yeah.
it's always nice to hear stuff about hunter-gatherers.
Yeah, let me see if I can pull it up here.
Okay, yeah,
talking the contrast between diffusionism and processualism.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
If you're cramming for your theory comp.
Yeah. So I'm going to quote here. In the former, ideas constitute culture. They can be lost when people die, gain traction and circulate with social interaction, and stagnate with isolation. In the latter, ideas are not especially unique or culturally and historically contingent. The processualist expectation is that people generate similar ideas under similar conditions. And so a really fantastic way of framing what can be really dense theoretical literature that you're pawing through. So
that's right. And so, listener, buckle up. We're going to have a lot of hit pieces on the next couple episodes because, as we mentioned, it's like the salmon run that we are not going to talk about on this episode, but that we just talked about and are going to talk about on the next episode.
Yeah, so we'll have to remember to use a salmon analogy when we do the intro to the next episode.
I think that's great. Maybe even wear a salmon shirt.
Maybe even. Yeah, salmon colors.
Yes.
Yeah, and probably some hit pieces that feature yours truly, your hosts in the coming weeks.
Do you hear that, Cambridge?
All right,
Ken, and I think we've come to the end of another episode.
I think we have. Yep, and so we've been everywhere, and the war was over, but the spirits weren't broken. I think you actually already used that line, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
but the war's about to start again right after Labor Day, so
exactly. Yeah, by the time this airs, we'll be battle hardened in the first week of school. Eh?
We sure will. Alrighty, Ken. Well, we'll talk to you soon, and listener, we'll talk to you in about a fortnight.
Yeah, talk to you soon, listener.
The New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast.